The Watership Down Podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down Podcast episode 224, in which we'll be going through chapter 15 of the graphic novel, For El-ahrairah to Cry. Just one bit of borough keeping before we get going. We only need about 30 more signatures to get the petition to put Fiver on the Fiver to 100 signatures, so do please share and tell your friends. The link will be in the notes. Anyway, let's get back to the graphic novel, which is about to take a very grim turn. The graphic novel, chapter 15, For El-ahrairah to Cry. Chapter 15 of the graphic novel has 12 pages and covers chapter 21, For El-ahrairah to Cry, from the original novel, which has 10 pages, and chapter 22, the story of the trial of El-ahrairah, from the original novel, which has 15 pages and does not appear in this part of the story, though it is told at this point in the novel, meaning that this chapter tells this part of the story in 13 pages less than the original. In the graphic novel, the title of this chapter is not presented as a quotation. We see the main entrance to the warren on Watership Down at the base of a beech tree. It is stylised almost as if in part of a fairy tale. There are only 2 frames on this page. The one below is underground in the newly dug honeycomb, which gives the effect of a camera panning down and dissolving to the scene we see, which is of 9 rabbits listening intently to the mutilated former Captain Holly as he begins to recount what happened after they left Sandalford Warren. He begins by saying that he is not the same rabbit who stopped them from leaving Sandalford, and that they are clearly not the same rabbits who left. This is followed by Holly saying that on the night they left Sandalford, the Owsler followed their scent to the brook. One of the Owsler says to Holly that they appear to have crossed here. And herein lies an easy point of confusion as regards the very real geography of the area in which Sandalford Warren is set. I recommend my first site visit as covered way back in episode 24 and the accompanying YouTube film for clarity. The Warren lies at the head of a small valley by Newbury Rugby Club. At the head of this valley, a small brook emerges that runs down its length, growing in size through the woods further south before it reaches the River Enbourne. I filmed this brook and the beautiful gentle sound of its water during Site Visit 1 in 2021. At the beginning of Chapter 5 in the novel, the rabbits are described as following the course of the brook to the woods. Later, in Chapter 21, Holly describes how the Owsler followed their scent down to the brook. Seeing as the brook lies right by the warren, I've always assumed this to mean that the Owsler followed their scent down to the woods, at which point the brook presumably becomes a little larger. I must admit to not having checked this back in 2021. However, in the graphic novel, the script appears to confuse the brook leading to the Enbourne from Sandalford with the River Enbourne itself. This is not the most egregious example of this by any means. I refer you to the comical pursuit along the Enbourne in the Netflix series for the worst example. However, I would not be a proper Watership Down geek if I did not mention this. Moving on. We see the El-ahrairah as the news is reported to him. He sensibly says there is no point in pursuing them, but adds that any that return will be arrested. This is presumably the normal policy in an authoritarian warren. We see rabbits at Silfley discussing Fiver's warning in disparaging terms, the assumption being that he was just a small rabbit trying to seem important. Holly continues that for a few days later it began to rain. This would have been as the rabbits arrived at Cowslip's Warren, though that is not stated here. Holly says that he saw some men as he went above ground to pass Fracker. They were talking a lot, and one of them prodded each hole they came to with his boot. Silver asks what the El-ahrairah said about this. Holly says they had no guns or ferrets, so he didn't think to mention it. Men, after all, are the most mysterious of ill. For a rabbit, it is impossible to work out why they do what they do. The following morning, the weather was better, so Holly set off for a garden in the hope of finding some carrots, in the true spirit of what I call Peter Rabbit Undressed in episode 119 on the alternative universe of Watership Down. When he returned later that morning, there was a hoodoo in the lane by the notice board. And because this is a graphic novel, we get to interpret their word in human terms. What Holly sees is a huge yellow JCB, as they're called here in Britain, after our main manufacturer of excavators. As Holly describes their actions, we see a human in a boiler suit and wearing a flat cap filling in the entrance to a burrow. Another human in cap and work suit and smoking a cigarette kneels down holding a thick hose that he has stuck down an open hole. He even manages to look bored. Holly says there was a hissing sound. Hazel asks him not to make it too grim. Holly responds that he hasn't even started yet. He continues that the hissing turned the air bad. Even some way off and above ground, it made him feel dizzy and sick. A man points at a rabbit emerging from a hole that hasn't been filled. Holly says this was scabious, adding that the boy shot him and the hole was filled in. We see Scabious' dead body, his side bloody with shotgun pellets, blood running from his nose, his eyes still open. Holly says that the poisoned air was filling the runs and burrows. He says he can only imagine what it was like. Bluebell says no. He looks down and says, "No, you cannot." Holly tells him he doesn't have to, but Bluebell continues, his usual jokey demeanour gone for the moment. And so we experience the first proper retelling of what Bluebell went through inside Sandalford Warren since the original novel, and the first ever visual portrayal. He says the blocked runs were crammed with rabbits, clawing and kicking to find a way out. We see this dreadful scene, reminiscent of the 1978 film, as he adds there was nowhere to go. Only this time it is in natural colour rather than stylised, and there are panicked eyes, opened bloodied mouths, and claw marks. The extremely lucky Bluebell says he remembered the slack run that passed underneath the warren. He says Frith must have guided him to it. From above he could hear the dreadful sounds of a dying warren, but here he was away from the worst of the bad air. We see him alone, isolated, in the midst of complete darkness. And then he encounters Pimpernel, who has found his way to the slack run as well. He knows how to get out, but is in a bad way from the gas. Bluebell tells of how he had to shove and bite Pimpernel to keep him moving, terrified of being trapped behind him. We see him sink his teeth angrily into Pimpernel's bloodied haunch. At last they emerge into fresh air in the woods, where they meet Captain Holly. Holly takes over the tale again. He says a great shining claw tore the field to bits. Silver, his fellow Owsla member, interrupts again to clarify. Surely that is not what he means. Over the page we see the JCB at work, close up, as Holly insists that is exactly what happened. In an act as incomprehensible to a rabbit as an atomic bomb would have been to ancient humans, it literally destroyed an entire landscape. We are spared the sight of rabbit corpses among the earth and roots and stones. Bigwig says the men must hate them for raiding their crops and gardens, but Bluebell disagrees. They were killed just because they were in the way, and it suited the humans to do so. Holly says that for some reason all he could think of was Bigwig. He remembers going to arrest him. He adds that he really meant to kill him. This is a detail from the novel that I had not taken in before. As we see the three rabbits run from Sandalford as the JCB continued its terrible work in the background, Holly says he felt he had to find Bigwig and tell him he'd been wrong. We see the three rabbits asleep as he continues that they are able to track the 10 who left across the river and road and over the heather of the common. When they woke up, Pimpernel had a fever and didn't think he could carry on. Suddenly they found themselves surrounded by large rabbits. The narration switches to the actual conversation between Holly and an angry Cowslip. As soon as Holly mentions Hazel, Bigwig and Fiver, Cowslip, the not chief of the Warren of the Snares, orders them torn to pieces. We see the bloodied Holly and Bluebell running away, as Holly says that for all their size these rabbits couldn't really fight. However, Holly's ear was shredded. We see Cowslip staring angrily after them. Behind him we see the mob killing poor sick Pimpernel. Again we are spared the detail, though we do see another frame in which Pimpernel can be seen helpless on his back as he is killed. Cowslip sits calmly by as this happens. We do not see him or his warren again. Holly says bitterly that after escaping their warren, Pimpernel was killed by, of all things, fellow rabbits. In the foreground, a rabbit that may be Strawberry angrily just says, "Damn them." Having not been tipped off by pursuing Cowslip in fear of his life after Holly turns on him, in this version, Holly says they followed the trail of the 10 rabbits, with Bluebell telling his jokes to keep Holly going. It is a miracle they are able to follow the trail as far as the warren of the snares. How they would follow it after their encounter with Cowslip is beyond me. We see Bluebell tell the first part of a joke, but he does not look very cheerful, and we do not hear the punchline. Holly says his ragged ear was hurting him a lot, and he can't remember much. They reach Watership Down at last. Holly calls it a hill bigger than anything he'd ever seen, and adds that this was where he started seeing things. He was clearly becoming feverish from his injured ear, and was going the way of Pimpernel. As he makes his way towards the down, he sees the dead Owsla members Scabious and Toadflax in the sky. Then he sees the El-ahrairah and calls his name loudly. Holly narrates that it was as if he was calling for the Elil to come and get him, that Bluebell was wise to take cover. In one of the most quietly horrific illustrations in the entire graphic novel, we see Holly sitting out in the open, his eye wide in what I believe is called a 1,000-yard stare, as he calls Bigwig's name into the night, followed by "all dead." In the next panel we're back to the recovering Holly, as he says they know the rest, and apologises for frightening them. We see all 13 rabbits in the honeycomb, some with their heads bowed with the horror of what they have just heard, as Holly says that he wasn't the black rabbit that night, but that there can't have been many creatures that were closer to him than he was. We see the full moon over trees at night. Another view of it from further off over the beach hanger. Underground, Hazel licks Holly's ragged ear to clean it. He tells Holly it is clean, but it will never be as good as the other one and will stay ragged. Holly says it doesn't matter. He adds, sadly, that tomorrow there will be grass to be eaten and cracker to be passed. He is one of the lucky ones. Comparison with the book. Holly's opening statement is an elaboration of his closing statement in the novel. It is also a good example of an improvement on the original, in my opinion. The El-ahrairah's low opinion of Fiver after the departure is transferred to a conversation between two rabbits at Sandalford. The Hrudadu in the novel is a truck or van that the humans get out of. Here the JCB appears straight away. The death of Scabious is mercifully quicker than in the novel, where the gunshot doesn't kill him immediately. Bluebell's account of his escape is very faithful to the novel, though we are spared his having to claw and tear his way past the dead Celandine. Bluebell's conversation with the dying Toadflax about why the humans did this to their warren is transferred to the honeycomb on Watership Down, where Bluebell corrects Bigwig, instead of being corrected by Toadflax. Here, Toadflax only appears in Holly's delirious visions. Holly does not accost the pursuing Cowslip to find out where the 10 went after the warren of the snares, and Strawberry's expression of his feelings about the killing of Pimpernel by his former warren is reduced to a simple curse. Holly doesn't hallucinate Pimpernel in this version for some reason, just rabbits who were left behind at Sandalford. And his final statement about grass to be eaten and cracker passed is borrowed from Richard Adams' narration at the start of the next chapter in the novel, the story of the trial of El-ahrairah, which is omitted from this version. Next time, a certain seagull arrives on the down.